$40 billion. That is the value of the secret hiding in plain sight behind the Golden Arches. In 1974, Ray Kroc stood before a confused auditorium at the University of Texas. The students were there to learn about supply chains, French fries, and milkshakes. Instead, the founder of the world's most famous restaurant chain leaned into the microphone and told them they didn't understand his company at all. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not in the hamburger business. My business is real estate." At that exact moment, McDonald's owned more commercial property than any other entity on earth, with the sole exception of the Catholic Church. They controlled a portfolio of land worth more than the GDP of entire nations. This was not a restaurant chain. It was a sophisticated real estate hedge fund that happened to sell burgers to pay the mortgage. This is the story of how a failing milkshake salesman built the greatest property empire in history by convincing the world he was a cook. But to understand the scale of this deception, we have to go back to 1954. Ray Kroc was 52 years old and he was a failure. He was driving across a depression-scarred America with a trunk full of multi-mixers and a notebook filled with rejection notices. His health was failing. His marriage was crumbling. He had already burned through 17 years chasing one failed venture after another, from paper cups to Florida swampland schemes that left him nearly bankrupt. Then came the call from San Bernardino, California. A single hamburger stand wanted 8 multi-mixers. That was enough machinery to make 40 milkshakes simultaneously. No restaurant in America had ever ordered that many. Kroc drove 1,400 miles straight through the Mojave Desert to see it for himself. He arrived at a small octagonal building and witnessed something that defied everything he knew about the food service industry. The McDonald brothers, Maurice and Richard, had invented the Speedy service system. It was a revolutionary assembly line that could produce a hamburger every 15 seconds. Workers performed single, repetitive tasks with military precision. Burgers cost 15 cents. There were no plates, no waitresses, and no tipping. The brothers were clearing $100,000 annually from this single location. That was more than most restaurant chains made from 20 outlets. Kroc saw the future. He negotiated through the night in Richard McDonald's living room, eventually securing the rights to franchise the concept nationwide. The price was a mere $2.7 million. But the contract contained a fatal flaw the brothers never noticed. Kroc had insisted on controlling all real estate decisions for future restaurants. While the brothers focused on protecting their food preparation methods, they had inadvertently handed over the keys to the empire. However, the early days were a financial nightmare for Kroc. The franchise fees were too low and the margins were razor-thin. Enter Harry Sonneborn. He was a former Tasty Frez executive Kroc recruited in 1956, and he was the one who discovered the leverage hidden in plain sight. Sonneborn realized that the money wasn't in the meat. It was in the dirt. He proposed a radical shift. McDonald's would force franchisees to sign 2 separate agreements, one for the franchise rights and another for the property lease. The company would purchase prime corner lots, build the restaurants, and then lease them back to operators at a 40% markup. If a franchisee failed to meet standards or tried to break away, McDonald's didn't need to sue them. They could simply evict them. They could install a new operator within hours. By 1959, Sonneborn had created the Franchise Realty Corporation. This separate entity targeted intersections that city planners had marked for future highway exits. They bought land at $5,000 per acre that would be worth $200,000 within 5 years. They pioneered computer modeling to predict traffic patterns 20 years into the future, acquiring properties in empty fields that were destined to become suburban gold mines. The real estate strategy generated immediate cash flow that franchising alone never could. While competitors waited years to see profits from royalty fees, McDonald's collected rent from day one. A typical franchise generated $400,000 in annual food sales, producing only $20,000 in royalties. But that same location paid $65,000 in rent to the corporation. It was triple the income with none of the operational headaches. Kroc used this leverage to maintain tyrannical control over every aspect of the business. Franchisees who complained about rising beef prices found their leases mysteriously up for review. Operators who experimented with menu items received eviction notices. The company's real estate division became an enforcement mechanism more powerful than any legal contract. It was a system where McDonald's could never lose. If the restaurant succeeded, they collected rent and royalties. If it failed, they kept the appreciating land. The first cracks in this relationship appeared in 1961. The McDonald brothers finally realized what they had lost. They attempted to negotiate a better deal, demanding $2.7 million in cash to walk away completely. Kroc borrowed the money at punishing interest rates, but he was furious. The brothers then made their final mistake. They opened a new restaurant called the Big M, directly across from a McDonald's franchise, attempting to compete with their own creation. Kroc's response was brutal. He opened a corporate McDonald's location directly across the street from the Big M. He deliberately undersold them until they went bankrupt. He didn't just want to beat them, he wanted to erase them. Financial analysts on Wall Street initially missed the play entirely. When McDonald's launched its IPO in 1965, the prospectus buried the property holdings in the footnotes. Investors valued the company at $22.50 per share, based on food service metrics. They were unaware they were actually buying into one of the largest commercial real estate investment trusts ever assembled. Those who understood the model early made fortunes. A $1,000 investment in 1965 would be worth over $7 million today. By 1968, the strategy reached its zenith. McDonald's real estate holdings surpassed $1 billion in value. The company owned more prime commercial corners than Sears, Woolworths, and J.C. Penney combined. They had transformed from a restaurant chain into a property empire that just happened to sell hamburgers. This dominance allowed them to crush the competition during the 1970s recession. Burger Chef was once McDonald's largest rival with over 1,000 locations. But they hemorrhaged money on franchise agreements while property taxes consumed their cash reserves. McDonald's simply raised rents to offset inflation. They maintained profit margins while competitors shuttered stores they didn't actually own. By the end of the decade, McDonald's controlled 70% of all fast food real estate in America. The tax advantages were equally staggering. Depreciation write-offs on thousands of properties generated paper losses that offset operating income. This allowed McDonald's to reinvest profits tax-free for decades. The IRS treated them as a real estate company, providing benefits restaurant chains couldn't access. Meanwhile, land appreciation created an ever-growing asset base that banks would lend against infinitely. Sonnenborn's successor, Fred Turner, eventually refined the model into a mathematical formula. McDonald's would never pay more for land than what 7 years of rent would recoup. They would never build in locations with less than 20,000 cars passing daily. They would never sign leases shorter than 20 years. These rules effectively created an algorithm for wealth accumulation that functioned regardless of whether people actually bought the food. But the collapse nearly came in 1977. The Federal Trade Commission launched a massive antitrust investigation into McDonald's real estate practices. Competitors filed complaints alleging the company used property control to create illegal monopolies. The investigation revealed that McDonald's had secretly purchased land around competitors' restaurants, then refused to sell it, creating dead zones where rivals couldn't expand. Internal documents subpoenaed during the investigation exposed the full extent of the strategy. McDonald's maintained a blacklist of properties they would never sell, regardless of price, specifically because competitors needed them. They had purchased entire shopping centers just to prevent Burger King from obtaining a lease. They bought land they never intended to develop, holding it vacant for decades simply to control market entry. The FTC case threatened to force McDonald's to divest its real estate holdings. This would have destroyed the entire business model. Lawyers argued for 3 years, while the company's stock price plummeted 40%. The resolution finally came through a consent decree in 1980. McDonald's could keep its existing properties, but had to modify future acquisition practices. They had won. they agreed to limitations that barely affected their strategy, emerging with their empire intact. When Ray Kroc died in 1984, he left behind a corporation that owned or controlled over 11,000 pieces of prime real estate, worth an estimated $14 billion. His widow, Joan, inherited a fortune built on property appreciation that dwarfed anything hamburger sales had ever generated. She would eventually donate billions to charity, funding hospitals and peace studies with money that accumulated from parking lots and corner plots across 6 continents. Today, the numbers are even more terrifying. McDonald's real estate portfolio exceeds $40 billion in value. It generates over $6 billion annually in rental income alone. The company owns the land beneath 45% of its restaurants and the buildings on another 70%. It is a property empire larger than most sovereign wealth funds. The lesson extends beyond fast food. It has become the hidden architecture of modern capitalism. Amazon's warehouse network follows McDonald's playbook, controlling strategic logistics real estate that competitors can't replicate. Tesla's supercharger stations occupy corners that gas stations will desperately need as electric vehicles proliferate. Business schools now teach the McDonald's case as the definitive example of strategic misdirection. While competitors focused on food quality, customer service, and menu innovation, McDonald's quietly assembled the largest commercial real estate empire in history. They won not by making better hamburgers, but by understanding a fundamental truth. In capitalism, the business that controls the land controls the game. Every strip mall, every highway exit, and every suburban intersection bears the invisible imprint of this revolution. The Golden Arches aren't just a logo, they are surveyor's marks on an empire that generates more wealth from dirt than beef. The hamburger, it turns out, was never the product. The product was the ground beneath it. And Ray Kroc, the failed milkshake salesman who couldn't cook a hamburger if his life depended on it, built the most successful real estate company in human history by convincing the world he was in the